The year is 1655, and the Caribbean has become something no empire intended, a classroom where criminals learn to survive what kings cannot defeat. Pierre Legrand stands in the ruins of his hideout on Tortuga, watching the morning sun reveal what last night's hurricane destroyed. His European-style wooden shelter, built according to French naval specifications, has been reduced to splinters scattered across half a mile of coastline. 23 of his crew are dead. The storm took everything except the men who found shelter in structures the pirates had mocked just days before, rough huts built by Carib natives, still standing as if the hurricane had been nothing more than a strong breeze. Legrand is a buccaneer, not a builder, but he understands survival, and what he's looking at doesn't make sense according to everything he knows about construction. The native structures shouldn't have survived. They're made of palm wood and thatch, materials any educated European would dismiss as primitive. Yet there they stand while his proper timber building constructed with iron nails and European joinery has vanished. Legrand walks to the nearest Carib shelter and places his hand on a support beam. It's flexible, not weak, but flexible. The entire structure had bent with the wind instead of fighting it. Within 2 months, everything changes. Escaped slaves arrive from Jamaica, bringing with them construction knowledge from West Africa that's been refined over centuries of building in tropical storms. These men and women understand something the Europeans don't, that the Caribbean requires different thinking than London or Paris. They show Legrand's crew how to dig foundations deeper, how to choose materials that work with the wind rather than against it, how to predict where water will flow when the storm surge comes. The first multicultural construction crews in the Americas form not from idealism but from necessity. French pirates work alongside African builders and native Carib engineers because staying alive matters more than prejudice. They share knowledge, they experiment, they fail, and try again. But here's what the records don't tell us. Who made the first decisions? When dozens of men from different continents, speaking different languages, with different building traditions, somehow create structures that surpass anything their home civilizations could build, who led that process? The historical documents show us the results but hide the collaboration that made it possible. By 1668, when Henry Morgan arrives with 30 men, Tortuga has transformed. The primitive camps are gone, replaced by something that will baffle the Royal Navy for the next 60 years. Morgan doesn't just find shelter, he finds a laboratory of innovation where outlaws have accidentally created engineering marvels. The legendary storm of 1665 proves what the pirates have built. His Majesty's ships Coventry, Success, and Helper 3 warships, representing the finest maritime construction in the British Empire, are destroyed in a single night. 247 Royal Navy sailors die. The ships, built in the best dockyards of England with the best materials available, simply cannot withstand the hurricane's fury. Their solid oak construction, their proper European engineering, their military-grade craftsmanship means nothing when the wind reaches 150 miles per hour. Morgan's stronghold on Tortuga stands untouched. The palm beam construction flexes like ship masts in the wind. The buildings dance with the storm rather than fighting it. When Royal Navy survivors wash ashore on Tortuga the next morning, they find pirates eating breakfast in structures that shouldn't exist, that violate every principle of construction they've been taught. The survivors report back to their commanders, but no one believes them. The official Royal Navy report, still preserved in the Praetorian British Archives, attributes the survival of the pirate stronghold to location and fortune rather than engineering. It's easier to believe in luck than to accept that criminals have surpassed the empire's best builders. In 1670, the impossible happens again. Miguel de Cervantes, a Spanish military engineer trained in Madrid, defects to the pirates. His reasons remain mysterious. The Spanish records call him a traitor and a madman, while pirate accounts simply note his arrival without explanation. What matters is what he brings. Military fortification plans representing 200 years of European defensive engineering. The pirates don't follow his plans, they adapt them. Cervantes watches as pirate builders take his stone fortress designs and transform them using materials that shouldn't work. They create mortar from crushed turtle shells that hardens stronger than European cement. They dig foundations using mangrove roots that grip bedrock 30 feet down, creating anchorage systems Cervantes had thought impossible outside of mountain construction. His European plans become templates that pirates modify with indigenous materials and techniques from 3 continents. What Cervantes discovers, what he will later write in letters that Spanish authorities suppress, is that the pirates have stumbled onto something profound. They're not rejecting European engineering knowledge, they're integrating it with building traditions from Africa and the Americas that Europeans have dismissed as primitive. The combination creates structures that surpass what any single tradition could achieve. By 1680, the transformation is complete. Pirate havens support 3,000 residents year-round. These aren't temporary camps, they're functioning towns with permanent structures designed to survive the worst nature can deliver. Meanwhile, British Port Royal, built according to proper colonial specifications, evacuates every hurricane season. Every. The resident who can afford it flees inland. The ships leave harbour. Trade stops completely. The Crown's accountants calculate that these evacuations cost £200,000 annually in lost trade revenue. That's more than the entire annual budget of some British colonies. The economic impact of poor construction becomes impossible to ignore. But here's what makes this truly remarkable: the pirate building codes. Through democratic vote, pirate crews establish the first building codes in the Americas. Every crew must contribute 1/10 of their plunder to communal storm shelters. It's an insurance system, created by criminals, 150 years before Lloyd's of London formalises marine insurance for legitimate commerce. The pirates vote on construction standards, on foundation depths, on material requirements. They create accountability through democracy. The records show us the codes, they show us the votes, but they don't show us how men who spent their lives rejecting society's rules somehow created better rules than society itself. How did democratic councils of outlaws achieve what monarchies could not? The answer lies buried in structures that still stand, in foundations that still grip bedrock, in techniques that engineers are only now beginning to understand. The Caribbean has become history's most unlikely laboratory, where those civilization rejected have built what civilization needs, and the storm season is just beginning. Between 1690 and 1720, something extraordinary happens in the outlaw settlements of the Caribbean. What began as survival instinct transforms into systematic innovation that will change maritime construction forever. The architects of this golden age have names that appear in fragmentary records, names that official histories tried to erase. Dutch Hans, a shipwright from Amsterdam who abandoned legitimate commerce for piracy in 1692. Solomon, an African architect whose construction knowledge spans 3 continents and whose real name has been lost to history, identified only by this single biblical designation that appears in 27 different pirate logbooks. These men, working with dozens of other master builders whose names we'll never know, transform crude hideouts into sophisticated fortress cities. But here's what should trouble us. How did they communicate? Dutch Hans spoke no African languages. Solomon spoke no Dutch. Yet, somehow they collaborated on projects requiring precise mathematical calculations, structural planning, and coordinated construction crews. The buildings they created together still stand, but the mystery of their collaboration remains sealed in languages the historical record didn't preserve. Benjamin Hornigold arrives in Nassau in 1713 and changes everything. Hornigold is known to history as a pirate captain, a man who would eventually betray his fellow outlaws and accept the king's pardon. But in 1713, he's an engineer with vision. He establishes Nassau's harbour defences using captured Spanish blueprint documents that took Spanish engineers 40 years to perfect. But Hornigold doesn't simply copy Spanish designs. He modifies them using Taino astronomical knowledge. The Taino people, nearly destroyed by European colonization, possessed weather prediction systems refined over 1,000 years of Caribbean habitation. They tracked bird migrations, ocean temperatures, wind patterns, and star positions to forecast storms with remarkable accuracy. Hornigold finds Taino survivors, learns their methods, and integrates celestial observation into military fortification planning. The result is unprecedented. Nassau's defenses can predict major hurricanes 11 years in advance based on long-term astronomical cycles. 11 years. European meteorology won't achieve anything comparable until the 20th century. Yet pirate engineers in 1713 are planning construction based on storm predictions stretching more than a decade into the future. The Spanish blueprints Hornigold captured are stored in the Archive of the Indies in Seville. They're covered with annotations in 3 different hands, showing modifications that Spanish engineers never imagined. But what we don't see in those documents is who taught Hornigold the Taino astronomical systems, or how that knowledge survived the near genocide of the Taino people. Someone preserved that information. Someone taught it to pirates. That story exists only in the buildings themselves. Blackbeard's engineer changes the game again. The man identified in records only as Marcus, described as a former slave of considerable mathematical genius, creates the first hurricane-proof powder magazine in 1715. This matters more than it might seem. Gunpowder storage has defeated every Caribbean settlement. One lightning strike, one flood, one spark during a storm, and the entire ammunition supply explodes. Marcus solves a problem that has killed thousands. He digs chambers into coral bedrock, 30 feet below sea level. He lines them with pitch-sealed mahogany that creates waterproof barriers. The magazines remain completely dry through Category 5 hurricanes, protecting gunpowder that represents enormous financial investment. But the true innovation is the ventilation system air shafts that prevent moisture accumulation, while being positioned to avoid flooding even during maximum storm surge. Modern engineers examining these magazines in the 1990s found the ventilation calculations so sophisticated they initially assumed the structures were much more recent. Carbon dating proved otherwise. A man whose education, background, and fate remain completely unknown created engineering solutions that wouldn't be formally documented for 250 years. Who taught Marcus advanced mathematics? Where did he learn structural engineering? The records say only that he was formerly enslaved, as if that explains everything while explaining nothing. His genius built the foundation of Blackbeard's power, yet we don't even know his full name. The hurricane of 1712 reveals the full extent of pirate success. Port Royal, attempting its third reconstruction since the earthquake of 1692, is obliterated. 3,000 colonists die in a single night. The proper British buildings, constructed with imported materials and European engineering, simply vanish. Ships are found 2 miles inland. Bodies are never recovered. The economic cost exceeds £1 million, a catastrophic loss that nearly bankrupts Jamaica. That same night, every pirate settlement from Nassau to Madagascar reports 0 casualties. 0. Not low casualties, not acceptable losses, 0 deaths. 3,000 British colonists perish, while not a single pirate dies in settlements that stretch across 3 oceans. The statistical impossibility of this outcome forces a question that official records refuse to address. How did criminals achieve perfect storm survival, while legitimate colonial governments failed catastrophically? The answer lies in the 2-week warning system based on frigate bird migrations. Pirates discovered that certain seabirds alter their behavior 14 to 16 days before major hurricanes, responding to atmospheric pressure changes imperceptible to humans. By tracking frigate bird movements across multiple islands, pirate settlements create an early warning network that gives them enormous survival advantages. But here's what the records hint at without stating directly. This wasn't pirate knowledge. Indigenous peoples across the Caribbean and the Indian Ocean had tracked bird migrations for centuries. Pirates didn't discover this system. They learned it from people whose traditional knowledge European science had dismissed as superstition. The question is, how that knowledge transfer occurred, and what it cost the people who shared it. Anne Bonny enters the historical record in 1716, and with her comes another mystery. Female pirates are rare enough that every mention of them attracts attention, but Bonny isn't just a fighter, she participates in construction planning. Specifically, she designs the hidden underwater pilings that support seemingly impossible overhanging fortifications at Nassau. These pilings are driven into the seabed at precise angles, creating support structures invisible from the surface, that allow fortress walls to extend 20 feet beyond their foundations. The engineering mathematics required for these calculations, accounting for tidal forces, storm surge, structural load distribution, represent advanced knowledge that women in 1716 were supposedly incapable of possessing. Official histories dismiss Bonny as an adventuress, a romantic figure. They don't mention her architectural innovations because acknowledging them would require explaining how an illiterate pirate woman mastered engineering principles that wouldn't be formally taught to anyone until the 19th century. Charles Vane demonstrates the full superiority of pirate engineering in 1716. His 12 cannons repel HMS Pearl's 40 guns in a battle that should have been impossible. The Pearl outguns Vane's position more than 3-1. British cannon fire should reduce the pirate fortress to rubble within hours. Instead, the fortress walls angled to deflect both cannonballs and hurricane winds turn the Pearl's own ammunition against it. Cannonballs bounce off at calculated angles, several striking the Pearl itself. The British ship retreats after 8 hours of futile bombardment. The fortress walls incorporate principles that won't appear in European military engineering texts until the 1860s. They use geometry that dissipates impact force, angles that redirect projectiles, and materials that absorb shock. Vane's 12 cannons are merely the visible weapons. The real defensive power comes from architecture that treats cannonballs like wind, something to be redirected rather than resisted. Pirates develop something else unprecedented: the hemisphere's first building apprenticeship program. Children in pirate settlements learn construction mathematics alongside navigation, creating a generation of maritime engineers. These programs run from 1695 to 1725, producing hundreds of trained builders. The curriculum, preserved in fragments, shows systematic education rivaling anything available in European universities. Young pirates learn to calculate wind loads, design drainage systems, predict storm patterns, and integrate materials from different building traditions. They study under master builders from 5 continents. The apprenticeship combines practical construction work with theoretical knowledge, creating skilled engineers through a process that won't be formalized in legitimate society for another century. The economic comparison becomes devastating for the British Empire. Pirates spend 8,000 pieces of 8 building Nassau's main fortress, approximately £40,000 sterling. The British waste £400,000 sterling on 3 failed attempts to capture it. That's a 10-to-1 cost ratio that forces Parliament to question naval leadership. How can outlaws with limited resources create defences that cost 10 times more to defeat than to build? The answer lies in integration. Pirates combine knowledge systems that empires keep separate. They learn from enslaved Africans, indigenous Americans, defecting Europeans, and Asian traders. They create synthesis where empires create hierarchy, and somehow, in the process, they build better. The golden age of pirate engineering reaches its apex in 1720. 30 years of innovation have created settlements that will stand for 300 years. But empires, finally, are beginning to understand what they're facing, and they're sending their best. Woodes Rogers arrives in Nassau on July 26, 1720, with 2,000 troops and a mandate from King George himself: end the pirate republic by any means necessary. What Rogers doesn't know, what no one in London understands, is that he's not launching a military campaign. He's walking into an education he never wanted, facing engineering superiority the empire refuses to acknowledge. Rogers is a capable naval commander, a man who circumnavigated the globe and survived countless battles. But nothing in his experience prepares him for what he discovers in the pirate settlements. These aren't primitive camps that superior British forces can simply overwhelm. They're sophisticated fortress cities built on principles that shouldn't exist outside European military academies, modified by knowledge systems Rogers has never encountered. His first intelligence reports read like fantasy. Pirates have created weather prediction networks stretching from Bermuda to Barbados, forecasting storms weeks in advance with accuracy that makes Royal Navy weather estimates look like guesswork. Rogers initially dismisses these reports as exaggeration. Surely illiterate criminals cannot predict hurricanes better than educated British officers. Then he experiences it himself. On August 14, 1720, pirate lookouts begin storm preparations. They secure buildings, move supplies to elevated storage, reinforce harbour defences, and evacuate vulnerable positions. Rogers' officers see nothing wrong with the weather. Clear skies, calm seas, typical August conditions. The British laugh at pirate paranoia. 16 days later, a Category 4 hurricane slams into Nassau with winds exceeding 135 miles per hour. Rogers' hastily constructed British command post is destroyed. 17 soldiers die. The Royal Navy ships in harbour are damaged beyond local repair, requiring expensive trips to British dockyards. Direct financial losses exceed £80,000. Not a single pirate structure suffers significant damage. Rogers writes to London, and his letter still preserved in the British National Archives reveals his confusion. The pirates possess meteorological knowledge of unknown origin, permitting storm prediction that surpasses our naval science by considerable measure. I confess I cannot explain this capacity. What Rogers discovers, through espionage and interrogation, changes his understanding of everything. The pirates aren't just building better structures, they're integrating knowledge from enslaved peoples' ancestral understanding of ocean temperatures, cloud formations, and atmospheric pressure. African and Caribbean indigenous weather prediction systems, refined over millennia, combined with European astronomical observations to create forecasting networks decades ahead of imperial science. But here's what troubles Rogers most. The pirates learned this knowledge through collaboration, not conquest. Someone taught them willingly. Enslaved peoples and indigenous survivors, who had every reason to hate European colonizers, chose to share their most valuable knowledge with outlaws. The historical record doesn't tell us why. It doesn't explain what pirates offered in return or what promises were made. We know only that the knowledge transfer occurred and that it gave criminals advantages over empires. The 3-day Battle of Nassau in 1721 becomes a strategic masterclass that military academies still study. Benjamin Hornigold, who knows these defences better than anyone, having designed many of them, leads the pirate resistance. He's facing Rogers, his former ally, in a conflict that both men understand will determine Caribbean control for generations. The battle begins on September 9th, with British forces attacking from 3 directions, using textbook European siege tactics that should overwhelm any defensive position. The pirates don't fight the way Rogers expects. They delay, they harass. They make British forces move slowly through defensive positions that seem designed for retreat rather than resistance. Rogers senses something wrong but cannot identify the trap until September 11th, when his meteorological officers report disturbing atmospheric readings. A major hurricane is approaching. It will hit Nassau within 48 hours. Rogers faces an impossible choice: retreat and admit defeat, or maintain the siege and risk his entire force in a storm that could kill thousands. The pirates have used an approaching hurricane as a weapon, turning nature itself into their greatest defensive advantage. Rogers orders retreat on September 12th, just hours before the hurricane strikes with devastating force. British casualties during the retreat: 238 dead, over 400 injured. Ships lost. 3. Financial cost: £120,000 sterling. Pirate casualties: 6 injured during the fighting, 0 deaths during the storm. Hornigold's strategy reveals something profound about pirate military thinking. They don't just build structures that survive hurricanes, they plan military operations around storm patterns, using their superior weather prediction to turn natural disasters into tactical advantages. It's asymmetric warfare of the highest order, turning weakness into strength by embracing what empires try to control. When the storm surge finally exposes the hidden foundation systems in 1722, Royal Navy engineers stand speechless. They see flexible joints that absorb wind pressure through mechanical systems that won't be formally documented until the 1920s. They observe drainage systems preventing flooding using principles of hydrology that European engineers haven't discovered. They examine modular construction, allowing rapid post-storm repair through interchangeable components that represent assembly line thinking a century before the Industrial Revolution. The Chief Royal Engineer, Thomas Walker, writes a classified report that won't be declassified until 1987. The pirate fortifications incorporate engineering innovations surpassing current European practice by considerable margin. We possess neither the theoretical knowledge nor practical skills to replicate these structures. Recommend immediate acquisition of pirate construction methods through any available means. Empire, finally, admits it must learn from outlaws. Calico Jack Rackham's last stand in 1720 provides another revelation. His fortress survives direct hits from 60-pound cannons using walls that shouldn't work according to any European engineering principle. Solid stone walls shatter under sustained cannon fire, it's military fact. But Rackham's walls, filled with sand and crushed coral, absorb impact better than any solid construction. The physics make sense once British engineers examine the debris. The fill material dissipates kinetic energy through millions of tiny impacts, spreading force across the entire wall structure instead of concentrating it at the point of impact. It's the same principle that modern body armor will use multiple layers of energy-absorbing material rather than single solid barriers. But here's what the examination reveals that troubles everyone. The coral is crushed to specific particle sizes, and the sand is layered in precise ratios. This isn't random fill material. Someone calculated the optimal mixture for maximum energy absorption. Someone understood physics that European science won't formally describe for another 150 years. The capture of Solomon in November 1722 represents the intelligence coup of the century. Solomon, the African architect whose full name remains unknown, is offered a choice: hang as a pirate or teach British engineers everything he knows. He chooses freedom. For 6 months, Solomon instructs Royal Navy engineers in construction techniques that transform Caribbean colonial architecture. He teaches them the palm beam flexibility technique, explaining how certain materials become stronger through controlled movement rather than rigid resistance. British engineers initially resist. Their training tells them buildings must be rigid, solid, unyielding. Solomon shows them otherwise. He demonstrates how flexibility prevents catastrophic failure, how movement absorbs force, how apparent weakness becomes actual strength. The physics lectures he delivers, transcribed by fascinated British officers, reveal sophisticated understanding of structural mechanics, material science, and engineering mathematics. Where did Solomon learn this knowledge? The records don't say. They identify him only as formerly enslaved, as if that explains his genius while hiding its origins. Did he learn in Africa before capture? Did he study during enslavement? Did other enslaved people teach him, preserving knowledge through generations of captivity? We don't know. History preserved his lessons but erased his story. Governor Rogers makes a decision in 1723 that official histories try to hide. He adopts pirate building codes wholesale, presenting them to London as his own innovations. The mandatory storm shutters, elevated foundations, community shelter requirements, and construction standards that pirates voted into law become British colonial regulations. Rogers even pays former pirates as construction consultants, though the official budget records hide their identities under vague contractor descriptions. The transformation of Caribbean colonial architecture happens rapidly. Between 1723 and 1725, British colonies rebuild using techniques learned from outlaws. Insurance companies notice immediately. Rates for pirate-designed buildings drop to 1/3 the cost of traditional structures. The economic advantages become impossible to ignore. The entire Caribbean economy shifts. Merchants demand pirate-style construction. Plantation owners hire former pirate builders. Insurance companies require hurricane-resistant features that only outlaw techniques can provide. Empire adopts what it tried to destroy, and in doing so, admits a truth it never wanted to face. Sometimes criminals understand survival better than civilization. By 1725, the line between pirate innovation and colonial practice has blurred beyond recognition. The techniques that built Nassau's fortresses now build British government buildings. The engineering that protected outlaws now protects the empire. But the question remains: who really won this conflict? The empire captured the pirates, but the pirates captured the empire's imagination and transformed its architecture forever. 300 years after the last pirate fortress fell, their engineering principles still protect millions of lives across the Caribbean and beyond. The profound transformation they initiated continues in ways that would astonish even the builders who started it all. Archaeological excavations in 1998 uncover something remarkable in Nassau. Dr. Elena Vasquez, leading a team from the University of Miami, discovers intact pirate structures buried under centuries of sediment and later construction. Her initial assumption is that these foundations date from the late 19th century. Their sophistication suggests modern engineering knowledge. Carbon dating proves her wrong. The structures are from 1715 to 1725, surviving 300 years and 47 major hurricanes, while remaining structurally sound. Nearby, British colonial buildings from the same period exist only as foundation stones, their superstructures long since destroyed by storms that left pirate construction untouched. Dr. Vasquez's analysis, published in the Journal of Historical Engineering, reveals something that changes our understanding of technological progress. The pirate structures anticipate 20th century engineering principles that weren't formally documented until the 1920s. Wind load distribution calculations match modern specifications. Storm surge mitigation systems mirror contemporary best practices. Flexible construction techniques parallel seismic engineering that wouldn't be developed until after the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. But here's what troubles the academic community. These weren't accidents. The precision of the calculations, the consistency of the techniques across multiple sites, the systematic integration of principles from different building traditions all indicate deliberate engineering knowledge that shouldn't exist in the early 18th century. Someone knew. Multiple people knew. And somehow that knowledge disappeared from official records for 200 years, preserved only in structures that refused to fall. The United States Navy discovers pirate legacy during World War II in ways military historians rarely discuss. Admiral Chester Nimitz, planning Pacific operations in 1943, faces a problem that nearly derailed American island-hopping strategy: how to maintain bases through typhoon season. Japanese forces abandoned certain islands during storm months, but American operations couldn't afford such lengthy interruptions. A naval historian named Commander James Richardson, researching Caribbean colonial history, discovers pirate seasonal operational patterns. Pirates maintained year-round bases by building structures that survived hurricanes and by timing operations around predictable storm windows. Richardson's report to Nimitz includes detailed accounts of pirate construction and tactical planning. Nimitz adopts pirate hurricane tactics wholesale. American bases in the Pacific incorporate building techniques derived from 18th century outlaw engineering: flexible structures, elevated foundations, storm prediction networks, and seasonal operational planning based on historical pirate practices allow the Navy to maintain bases where Japanese forces cannot. The contribution to Allied victory, while never publicly acknowledged, appears in classified naval engineering reports that won't be declassified until 2009. Caribbean building codes today directly descend from pirate innovations in ways that residents rarely recognize. Mandatory storm shutters required by law in every Caribbean nation. Pirate innovation from 1715. Elevated foundations to prevent storm surge flooding. Pirate building codes from 1718. Community shelter requirements, ensuring every neighborhood has reinforced gathering spaces. Pirates voted these into law in 1719, 3 centuries before modern emergency management formalized the concept. The democratic process that created these codes matters as much as the codes themselves. Pirates established building standards through crew votes, creating accountability through consensus rather than top-down authority. Every crew member had voice in decisions affecting community safety. The building codes that resulted prioritized collective survival over individual convenience, requiring everyone to contribute to communal storm shelters. These principles, democratic decision-making about public safety infrastructure, mandatory community resilience requirements, shared resource pooling for disaster preparedness represent social engineering as sophisticated as the physical engineering that implemented them. Outlaws created governance systems that functioned better than contemporary monarchies, at least for the specific purpose of hurricane survival. The discovery of pirate construction manuals in 2015 reveals another dimension of their sophistication. Marine archaeologist Dr. Thomas Chen, excavating a shipwreck off Hispaniola, finds sealed containers, protecting documents from water damage. Inside are illustrated building guides showing construction techniques through pictures rather than text. These manuals represent the first known illustrated construction guides designed for illiterate workers. Each page shows step-by-step assembly processes using clear diagrams, material specifications through visual examples, and safety procedures through pictorial warnings. The format anticipates modern visual instruction systems by 300 years. Anyone familiar with contemporary furniture assembly instructions would recognize the approach immediately. The Swedish company IKEA perfected a system that pirates invented in the 1700s. But here's what makes these manuals extraordinary. They show techniques being taught across language barriers and literacy levels, preserving sophisticated engineering knowledge in accessible formats that could be understood by anyone willing to learn. This wasn't just practical documentation, it was democratic education, ensuring valuable knowledge spread beyond elite circles to everyone who needed it. Insurance companies calculate that pirate building techniques save $8 billion annually in hurricane damage across the Caribbean. Modern actuarial analysis, comparing damage rates between structures, incorporating pirate-derived techniques and those built using purely contemporary methods, shows dramatic differences in survival rates and repair costs. Buildings following pirate engineering principles, flexibility, elevated foundations, storm-resistant materials, proper drainage consistently outperform modern structures that ignore these lessons. The validation is complete. 3 centuries of data prove that outlaws understood sustainable construction better than empires. Their techniques, born from necessity and refined through democratic collaboration, created architecture that adapts to Caribbean reality rather than fighting it. While European colonial powers tried to impose their building traditions on an environment that rejected them, pirates learned from people who understood local conditions and integrated that knowledge into systematic engineering practice. The greatest irony emerges clearly in the historical record. Pirates, portrayed as civilization's enemies, created the architectural foundations that allowed Caribbean society to flourish. They're remembered as destructive criminals, yet their legacy is measured in millions of lives protected by building codes they pioneered. History vilified them while adopting their innovations, condemning their methods while celebrating their results. Today, every hurricane-resistant building from Miami to Trinidad owes its survival to democratic councils of outlaws who chose community resilience over imperial grandeur. The elevated houses of the Bahamas, the storm shutters of Jamaica, the reinforced shelters of Puerto Rico all trace their lineage to 1700 decisions made by people who had rejected society's rules but understood survival's requirements. Modern engineers rediscovering pirate techniques often express amazement at their sophistication. But perhaps the real lesson isn't about engineering at all. Perhaps it's about knowledge itself, how it forms, how it spreads, how it survives. The pirates succeeded because they learned from everyone. European defectors, African architects, indigenous builders, escaped slaves, rebellious women. They created synthesis where empires created hierarchy. They chose integration over domination. The structures still stand, 300 years later, testifying to choices made by people history tried to erase. Every building that survives the next hurricane, every life saved by codes requiring storm shelters, every community protected by elevated foundations, these are monuments to pirate engineering, built by outlaws who understood that innovation often comes from those who reject conventional wisdom. The Caribbean teaches us that civilization's progress sometimes requires civilization's rebels, that the most lasting solutions come from unlikely sources, that democracy, even among criminals, can achieve what tyranny cannot. The Pirate Republic fell in 1725, but the pirates won anyway. Their victory is measured not in territory or treasure, but in every structure that stands while the storm passes, protecting lives with techniques that outlaws perfected centuries ago. The hurricane season never ends in the Caribbean, but thanks to decisions made by people society condemned, civilization survives it year after year, building on foundations that criminals laid, following codes that outlaws wrote, protected by engineering that rebels perfected. History tried to forget them. The buildings remember everything.